My name is Jared Solis, and 3 months ago I started wearing a wire to my wife's office parties. Not because I'm paranoid, though my sister Tessa would argue otherwise, but because 20 years as an FBI forensic audio specialist taught me to recognize patterns, and the pattern here was simple. My wife Bree had started flinching every time her phone buzzed. The December snow was coming down hard outside the Meridian Corporate Center as I adjusted the tiny lapel mic hidden beneath my dress shirt. Inside the gleaming ballroom, Bree's company holiday gala was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over executives in designer suits, their laughter echoing off marble floors. I nursed a scotch and watched my wife work the room with practiced grace, her red dress catching the light as she moved from group to group. Bree Corlin, she kept her maiden name for professional reasons, was the kind of woman who commanded attention without trying. Sharp cheekbones, auburn hair always perfectly styled, and an MBA from Northwestern that she wielded like a weapon in corporate boardrooms. At 38, she was the youngest HR executive in Meridian Industries history. She was also terrified of something. Jared, right? The voice belonged to VP Corbin Findler, a man whose handshake always lasted 3 seconds too long. He appeared beside me with the fluid movement of a predator, his silver hair slicked back and his smile sharp enough to cut glass. Enjoying the party? It's something else, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. The mic was picking up everything. I could see the tiny red light blinking on my phone screen tucked discreetly in my jacket pocket. Findler stepped closer, and I caught the heavy scent of expensive scotch on his breath. His eyes were slightly unfocused, but his voice carried the confident tone of a man who'd never faced real consequences. "You know, Jared," he said, lowering his voice to what he probably thought was a conspiratorial whisper, "you should thank me. I taught your wife things you never could." The words hit like ice water, but I kept my expression steady. 20 years of interviewing suspects had taught me the value of patience. Instead of the reaction he was clearly expecting, I smiled and met his gaze directly. "And I'll teach you something tonight," I replied calmly. Findler's eyebrows rose slightly, but before he could respond, I was already walking toward the small stage where the evening's presentations would take place. The MC had just finished introducing the quarterly awards, and there was a natural lull in the program. I caught the event coordinator's attention, a nervous young man with a clipboard who looked grateful for any help. "Mind if I say a few words?" I asked, gesturing toward the microphone. "Just want to thank everyone for including the spouses." He nodded eagerly and handed me the wireless mic. Behind me, I could see Bree's face go pale as she realized what was happening. At the bar, CEO Saul Markham was refilling his champagne glass, completely oblivious to what was coming. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's sound system. "I'm Jared Solis, and I want to thank Meridian Industries for always making the spouses feel so welcome at these events." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. I could see Findler near the back, his face beginning to show the first signs of unease. "You know, I've learned so much about corporate culture over the years," I continued, pulling out my phone with practiced casualness, "especially about mentorship programs and how they really work." The applause died away as something in my tone registered with the crowd. I connected my phone to the ballroom sound system, a trick I'd learned from setting up recording equipment in countless FBI conference rooms. For instance, here's what real mentorship sounds like. Findler's voice filled the ballroom, crystal clear and unmistakably his own. "The private consultations are just between us, Amanda. You want that promotion, don't you? These are the kinds of conversations that separate the serious candidates from the rest." The effect was immediate. CEO Markham's champagne spray hit the CFO sitting beside him, the golden liquid arcing across the white tablecloth. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as 200 guests turned to stare at the speakers. But I wasn't finished. "And here's what happens when someone tries to report these mentorship sessions," I said, advancing to the next recording. Again, Findler's voice. "Think carefully, Jennifer. HR works for the company, not for you. You signed an NDA, remember? Besides, who's going to believe a disgruntled employee over a 20-year veteran with an impeccable reputation?" The silence in the ballroom was absolute now. I could see board members reaching for their phones, probably calling lawyers. Near the emergency exit, I spotted Linda Sykes, the HR director, slipping quietly out of the room. "These recordings span the last 3 months," I announced, my voice steady and professional. 7 different women, all participants in VP Findler's special mentorship program, all of whom were told their careers depended on keeping these conversations private. Findler was pushing through the crowd now, his face flushed with rage and panic. But hotel security had appeared, not to stop me, but to form a discreet barrier around the stage. Apparently, someone had made a phone call. I played one final clip, this one from just 10 minutes ago. "You should thank me. I taught your wife things you never could." The crowd turned as one to look at Findler, who had frozen halfway to the stage. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish pulled from water. "The FBI will be announcing a federal investigation tomorrow morning," I said into the microphone. "Wire fraud, extortion, and violation of federal employment law. But tonight, I just wanted to make sure everyone understood what kind of mentorship program they've been funding." I set the microphone back on its stand and walked off the stage. The ballroom erupted in chaos behind me, shouting voices, scraping chairs, the sound of 200 people trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Bree was waiting for me near the coat check, her face pale, but her eyes dry. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. 3 months, I replied. "Since you started jumping every time your phone rang, since you started working late every Tuesday, since you stopped sleeping." She nodded slowly. "The recordings? Everything. The threats, the NDAs, the whole system." I handed her my car keys. "The other women are filing civil suits tomorrow, 7 of them, all at once. Their lawyers have been coordinating for weeks." Behind us, I could hear Findler's voice raised in desperate protest, but the words were lost in the general commotion. Through the ballroom's tall windows, I could see news vans already pulling into the parking lot. "What happens now?" Bree asked. "Now you get to decide," I told her. "You can be a victim or a witness, but either way, this ends tonight." The next morning brought 3 things: a federal investigation, 7 civil lawsuits, and my wife's resignation letter. I watched the news coverage from our kitchen table, drinking coffee that had gone cold an hour ago while reporters explained how Meridian Industries stock had dropped 14% before trading was halted. Bree sat across from me, still in her bathrobe, staring at her laptop screen. "The FBI wants to interview me this afternoon," she said without looking up. "They're calling it a victim impact statement." "Good," I replied. "Tell them everything." She finally met my eyes. "Even about us? About what this did to our marriage?" I considered the question carefully. Our marriage had been struggling long before Findler entered the picture, but his manipulation had turned private problems into public humiliation. "Tell them whatever you think will help the other women." My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Tessa. "Saw the news. Holy crap, Jared, you okay?" I typed back, "Fine. Coffee later?" "Already here," came her reply, followed immediately by the sound of her key in our front door. Tessa Solis had never learned to knock, a habit that drove Bree crazy under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Bree barely looked up as my sister walked into the kitchen carrying a box of donuts and wearing a grin that could have powered the city. "My brother, the corporate vigilante," Tessa announced, setting the donuts on the counter. I always knew that FBI training would come in handy someday. "It wasn't vigilante work," I corrected. "It was evidence collection." "Same thing, different paperwork." She poured herself coffee without asking and settled into the chair beside me. "So, what's the real story? The news is making it sound like you just stumbled onto this guy's operation." I glanced at Bree, who nodded slightly. "I've been investigating for 3 months," I admitted. Started when Bree began showing classic signs of workplace coercion. Anxiety, insomnia, behavioral changes. "You profiled your own wife?" Tessa's eyebrows shot up. "I profiled the situation," I corrected. "Bree was a victim, not a suspect." Bree's laugh was bitter. "Some victim. I kept quiet for 2 years, Tessa. 2 years while he did this to other women." "Because he threatened your career," I pointed out. "Because he had HR backing him up. Because the system was designed to silence victims." My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. "Mr. Solis, this is Amanda Chen from Channel 7 News. We'd like to interview you about your role in exposing the Meridian Industries scandal." "They're calling it a scandal now," I told the women. Tessa snorted. "It's a federal crime, not a scandal. But I guess scandal sounds better on TV." The doorbell rang, and through the front window I could see a woman in a navy suit holding a briefcase. FBI, most likely. They had a distinctive look that was hard to miss. "That'll be Special Agent Martinez," I said, recognizing her from the business card she'd handed me at the hotel last night. "She's running the investigation." Agent Martinez was younger than I'd expected, probably mid-30s, with sharp eyes and the kind of handshake that meant business. She declined coffee but accepted a seat at our kitchen table, opening her briefcase with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Solis, I need to understand your methodology," she began, pulling out a digital recorder. "The recordings you made, walk me through the technical aspects." This was familiar territory. I'd given similar briefings dozens of times during my FBI career, explaining audio evidence to prosecutors and judges. Standard lapel microphone, connected to a digital recording app on my phone. Everything was recorded in public spaces or at company events where there was no expectation of privacy. And you wore this device for 3 months? Every time I attended a company function, yes, I was looking for patterns, trying to understand the scope of what my wife was experiencing. Agent Martinez made notes as I spoke. The women who are filing suit, did you contact them directly? No. I provided their lawyers with copies of relevant recordings where their voices appeared. The lawyers handled all victim contact. Smart, she admitted. Keeps you from being accused of witness tampering. Bree spoke up from across the table. Agent Martinez, what happens to the women now? The ones who signed NDAs? NDAs can't be used to cover up criminal activity, the agent replied. Your company's legal department knows this, which is why they are cooperating fully with our investigation. That was news to me. Meridian is cooperating. As of this morning, yes. New CEO, Saul Markham, resigned at 6 a.m., has turned over all personnel files, all NDA documents, and all financial records related to what they're calling inappropriate settlements. Tessa leaned forward. How much money are we talking about? I can't discuss specific figures, but let's say it's enough to constitute wire fraud when combined with the interstate communication aspects of Mr. Findler's activities. My phone buzzed with another unknown number. Then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. Media? Agent Martinez asked. Looks like it. She stood and handed me a business card. Don't talk to reporters until after you've testified before the grand jury. That'll probably be next week. After she left, the 3 of us sat in silence for a few minutes, processing the magnitude of what was happening. Outside, I could see a news van parked across the street. Jared, Bree said finally, what you did last night, it wasn't just about me, was it? I considered lying, but we'd had enough deception. No, it was about all of them. You, the other women, probably women we'll never know about, but mostly it was about the system that made it possible. The system? HR departments that protect companies instead of employees, NDAs that silence victims, corporate cultures that reward predators as long as they hit their numbers. I gestured toward the news van outside. That's what really needed exposing. Tessa raised her coffee mug in a mock toast. Here's to bringing down the system, one recording at a time. But even as we laughed, I knew this was just the beginning. Findler would fight the charges, Meridian would try to contain the damage, and the media would eventually move on to the next story. The real test would be whether anything actually changed. My phone rang again, this time a number I recognized. Vince, I answered. Let me guess. You saw the news. Saw it? Brother, I'm watching you on 3 different channels right now. When you said you were working on something big, I didn't think you meant national news big. Vince Romano ran a boxing gym downtown where I'd been training for the past 5 years. He was also the closest thing I had to a best friend, which probably said something about my social life. Can you meet me at the gym? I asked. I need to hit something, and it can't be a reporter. Come on down. I'll clear the ring for you. I looked at Bree, who was already reaching for her phone. FBI interview prep, she explained. I want to make sure I get this right. You will, I assured her. Just tell the truth. As I grabbed my gym bag, Tessa called after me. Hey, Jared, next time you want to take down a corporate conspiracy, maybe give your sister a heads up? I would have brought popcorn to that party. Despite everything, I found myself smiling as I headed for the door. Outside, the reporter from the news van started toward me, microphone in hand, but I kept walking. Agent Martinez was right. There would be time for talking later. Right now, I needed to hit something. Vince's gym occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse in the old industrial district, the kind of place where the heat barely worked and the equipment had seen better decades. But it was honest in a way that corporate conference rooms never were. What you saw was what you got, and everyone understood the rules. So, let me get this straight, Vince said, wrapping my hands with practiced efficiency. You've been running a one-man FBI operation for 3 months, and you didn't think to mention it? It wasn't FBI, I corrected, flexing my fingers to test the rap. It was just good investigative practice. Same difference. You profiled a corporate predator, gathered evidence, and took him down in front of 200 witnesses. He gestured toward the heavy bag hanging in the center of the ring. That's some Batman-level stuff right there. I started with light jabs, working on form rather than power. The rhythm was soothing after the chaos of the morning. Left, right, left, hook, simple and direct. The media's calling you a whistleblower, Vince continued, holding the bag steady. Channel 7 ran a whole segment on corporate accountability. They interviewed some professor from the university who said your approach was revolutionary. It wasn't revolutionary. It was just recording conversations in public spaces. Yeah, but the timing was perfect. The grand reveal at the company party? That was theater, brother. He was right, though I hadn't planned it that way. The opportunity had presented itself when Findler made his comment, and I'd simply acted on instinct. But the result had been undeniably dramatic. My phone, sitting on the bench beside the ring, started buzzing again. Through the gym's front window, I could see another news van pulling up outside. They found me, I muttered. Vince glanced toward the window and grinned. Want me to tell them you're not here? Tell them I'm busy. But before he could reach the door, it opened and a woman in an expensive suit walked in. She was probably 50, with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested she was used to getting what she wanted. Mr. Salas, I'm Patricia Hendricks from Hendricks, Moore and Associates. I represent 3 of the women who are filing suit against Meridian Industries. I unwrapped my hands and climbed out of the ring. How did you find me here? Your sister told me where you'd gone. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but my clients wanted me to thank you personally. Vince offered her a folding chair, which she accepted with a gracious nod. For a corporate lawyer in a boxing gym, she seemed remarkably at ease. Mr. Salas, what you did last night, it changed everything for these women. They've been carrying this burden for years, afraid to speak up because they thought no one would believe them. They had evidence, I pointed out. The NDAs, the settlement payments, the pattern of behavior. Evidence that was buried under legal agreements and corporate pressure. Your recordings provided independent corroboration of their experiences. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a tablet, scrolling through what looked like news articles. The story is getting national attention. 3 more companies have announced internal reviews of their HR practices. 2 CEOs have resigned preemptively. That surprised me. Already? Corporate America moves fast when federal investigators start asking questions. No one wants to be the next Meridian Industries. My phone buzzed with a text from Bree. FBI interview done. Coming home. Are you okay? I typed back, Fine. Home soon. Ms. Hendricks noticed my distraction. How is your wife handling all this? Better than expected. She's stronger than she knew. That's common with survivors of workplace coercion. They often don't realize their own resilience until they're free from the situation. Vince, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. What happens to the guy who did this? Findler? He was arrested this morning, Ms. Hendricks replied. Wire fraud, extortion, violation of federal employment law. Bail was set at $2 million. Did he make bail? His wife filed for divorce and froze their joint accounts. So no, he's currently in federal custody. I felt a grim satisfaction at that news. Lyra Ventrix, now Lyra Findler, I supposed, had always struck me as a woman who didn't tolerate embarrassment well. Having her husband exposed as a corporate predator on national television probably qualified as the ultimate embarrassment. Mr. Salas, Ms. Hendricks continued, there's something else you should know. The FBI investigation has expanded. They're looking at other companies where Mr. Findler worked previously. How many other companies? 3, spanning 15 years, potentially dozens of additional victims. The scope of it was staggering. What had started as my attempt to understand my wife's situation had uncovered a pattern of abuse that stretched back over a decade. The women I represent wanted me to give you this, Ms. Hendricks said, handing me an envelope. It's not a legal document, just a personal note. Inside was a simple card signed by 7 women I'd never met. Thank you for believing us before we believed ourselves. I stared at the card for a long moment, feeling the weight of what had happened. 3 months ago, I'd been a corporate security consultant trying to figure out why my wife was having trouble sleeping. Now I was apparently the face of a national conversation about workplace abuse. Mr. Salas, Ms. Hendricks was watching me carefully. The media attention can be overwhelming. If you need any advice on handling reporters, I'm not talking to reporters, I said firmly. Not until after the legal proceedings are finished. That's wise. But you should know that your story is inspiring people. I've gotten calls from women at other companies, asking about their rights, asking if they can speak up safely. After she left, Vince and I finished the training session in relative quiet. The news vans had multiplied outside. I counted 4 different stations represented, but the gym's back exit led to an alley that connected to a parking garage 3 blocks away. You know what this means, right? Vince said as we locked up the gym. That I need a better escape route? That you're not going back to corporate consulting anytime soon. Nobody's going to hire the guy who brought down Meridian Industries. He was probably right. My career as a corporate security consultant was effectively over. Companies didn't hire people who expose corporate scandals, even when those scandals involved criminal behavior. But as I drove home through the early evening snow, dodging news vans and thinking about 7 women I'd never met, I realized I was okay with that. Some things were more important than career security. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a federal courthouse waiting to testify before a grand jury when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You destroyed my life. This isn't over." I showed the message to Agent Martinez, who was reviewing my testimony notes beside me in the hallway outside the grand jury room. "Findler?" she asked. "Has to be. He's the only one with a reason to threaten me." She made a note in her file. "He's not supposed to have access to a phone in federal custody. I'll look into it." The grand jury proceedings were closed to the public, but I could see reporters waiting outside the courthouse through the tall windows. The story had grown beyond what anyone expected. 3 congressional representatives had called for hearings on workplace harassment, and the Department of Labor had announced new enforcement initiatives. "Mr. Solis?" A bailiff appeared at my elbow. "They're ready for you." Grand jury rooms are smaller than most people imagine, and less formal than regular courtrooms. 23 citizens sitting in 2 rows, listening to prosecutors explain why someone should be indicted for federal crimes. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Kim, walked me through the technical aspects of the recordings first. How they were made, why they were legal, what they proved about Findler's pattern of behavior. "Mr. Solis, in your professional opinion, do these recordings represent isolated incidents or part of a broader pattern?" "Definitely a pattern," I replied. "The language is consistent across different victims and different time periods. The threats are escalating in nature, and the coordination with HR to silence complaints shows institutional knowledge." "Meaning?" "Meaning Mr. Findler knew exactly how the company's system worked, and he used that knowledge to target vulnerable employees." One of the grand jurors, an elderly man in the front row, raised his hand. "Did you ever consider going to the police before taking matters into your own hands?" It was a fair question. I did consider it, but workplace harassment cases are notoriously difficult to prosecute without clear evidence. I knew that exposing the pattern publicly would encourage other victims to come forward. Another juror, a middle-aged woman. "Weren't you worried about your wife's privacy?" I was, but she was one of 7 victims, and staying silent would have meant the other 6 never got justice. After an hour of questions, I was dismissed. Agent Martinez was waiting in the hallway with an update. "The grand jury will vote this afternoon," she said. "But based on what I just heard, I'd say indictment is likely." "What about the threat I received?" "We traced it. The message came from Findler's lawyer's phone. Apparently his client grabbed it during a consultation meeting." "So he violated the terms of his detention?" "Among other things, the judge is not going to be happy." My phone rang, Bree calling from her new job at a nonprofit downtown. She'd found work with an organization that provided legal assistance to workplace harassment victims, a career change that surprised everyone, including herself. "How did it go?" she asked. "Good, I think. They seem to understand the evidence. I'm proud of you, for all of this." It was the first time she'd said that, and it meant more than I'd expected. "How are things at the new job?" "Busy. We've gotten over 100 calls since your story broke. Apparently Meridian wasn't the only company with this problem." After hanging up, I decided to walk home instead of taking the subway. The December air was sharp and clean, and I needed time to think about what came next. The media attention was finally starting to die down, but the legal proceedings would continue for months. Findler's criminal trial, the civil suits, the congressional hearings. It would be a long process. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from Tessa. "Saw the news vans leaving your house. Does this mean you're not famous anymore?" "Never was famous," I typed back. "Just temporarily notorious." "Same thing. Coffee tomorrow?" "Sure." As I turned onto my street, I noticed a familiar car parked outside my house, a silver BMW that belonged to Lyra Ventrix, Findler's soon-to-be ex-wife. She was sitting on my front steps, wearing a black coat and holding what looked like a manila envelope. "Mrs. Ventrix," I said as I approached, "this is unexpected. I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I wanted to thank you personally." She stood and handed me the envelope. "These are copies of documents from my husband's home office, financial records, correspondence, things that might be useful for the investigation." I opened the envelope and glanced at the contents: bank statements, emails, what looked like a list of names and dates. "Why are you giving me this instead of the FBI?" "Because I want you to understand the full scope of what he did. The FBI will focus on the criminal aspects, but this shows the personal cost." She was right. The documents painted a picture of systematic manipulation spanning 15 years and 4 different companies. Names, dates, settlement amounts. It was a comprehensive record of corporate predation. Mrs. Ventrix, why didn't I stop him? She laughed bitterly. Because I didn't know. Or maybe because I didn't want to know. It's hard to tell the difference sometimes. We stood in silence for a moment, watching snow begin to fall under the streetlights. The women he hurt, she continued, they deserve more than just a criminal conviction. They deserve to have their stories heard completely. The civil suits will help with that. Maybe, but civil suits are about money. This is about something bigger. She was right again. The legal system would provide justice of a sort, but it wouldn't undo the years of fear and silence that Findler's victims had endured. What will you do now? I asked. Rebuild. Start over. Try to figure out how to live with the knowledge that I was married to a predator for 20 years. After she left, I sat on my front steps reading through the documents she'd given me. The scope of Findler's activities was even worse than the FBI had discovered. More victims, more companies, more years of systematic abuse. But there was something else in the papers that caught my attention. A pattern of corporate responses that suggested other executives knew what was happening and chose to look the other way. I pulled out my phone and called Agent Martinez. I think we need to expand the investigation, I told her. This goes deeper than just Findler. The next morning brought news that the grand jury had voted to indict Corbin Findler on 14 federal charges. By afternoon, 3 more companies had announced internal investigations, and by evening, I had received 17 phone calls from women at other companies, asking if I could help them document their own experiences with workplace harassment. Apparently, my career as a corporate consultant was over, but my work was just beginning.